Tesla is the big name here. When did you buy your first shares of Tesla, Hamilton?
Ooh. Oh, this is a moment of shame, I think, more than anything. But I don't remember the year, but I know the price. So that price was somewhere around $18 to $24 a share pre-split.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
So
early on, yeah.
pre-split 18 to 24, or was that, at today's, was it, $100 around, 90 $90 to 120, are you saying?
Pre-split. So yeah, no, before any of this stuff happened, like shortly after the IPO.
Wow.
I've been investing for the last 14 years. I think this was something I probably picked up from JP Morgan, where we had to play, we played a game, which was predict the stock market. And
Hmm.
I remember back then dating myself for the umpteenth time today. But at that time, the stock market, the Dow was at 5,000.
Yeah.
This is in the mid to late 90s. And I remember reading the equity research from the JP Morgan analysts to play this internal game that we were playing. And they
Yeah.
were like, oh, way overvalued, big bubble, it's going to pop. And then sure enough, it went 5,000, 6, 7, 8, 9,000. We had a really nice bull run through the dot-com bubble and then burst. And from that, I concluded that bubbles tend to burst a few years, like 3 to 4 years after they should. So in
Yeah.
2004, when I was looking to buy my home, I was like, the real estate seems super expensive. This seems crazy. And anyone seems to be able to go out and get a mortgage. So then
Yeah.
in my head, I thought, bubbles burst about 3, 4 years after I think they should. So then sure enough,
Mm.
2007, 2008, we had the Great Recession. And so I think from those experiences, that really emboldened me to then jump right in and really take advantage of what I thought was going to be a massive new bull market. And so I've been investing in the last 14 years. So that's how I got to look at Tesla. But one of the things I've learned from you and your investing pattern is how a really, really strong company can go flat for a very long time before it suddenly shoots up. And if you're not there for the flat part, it's very unlikely that you'll be there for when it shoots up. So if you really believe in a company, you have to be able to weather those moments when nothing exciting is going on. But yeah,
Yeah.
18, $24, something like that. I trade it
Yeah.
like, it's like, ooh, I bought it at 24, let me sell it at 25. Good. This
Yeah.
is, bagged a good
I
$1
remember those
gain.
days. I think I was buying my first Tesla long-term options then, and they were expiring worthless. It was in a low single-digit billion market cap. That's how big Tesla was
Yeah.
back then. It was like the size of Lemonade Insurance today. That's how big Tesla was back then.
I,
Um,
I know you're
that's
big on
funny.
Lemonade. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you feel about Tesla today? We're at
Yeah.
what, 1,100 or so dollars a share.
Yeah, 1,100 plus per share right now. Yeah, Matt and I talk about it almost every day. It's our biggest holding, our fund and our personal holdings, and
Yeah.
yeah, we feel very strong. We were talking today that it seems like a very safe haven. It's a rare combination of very disruptive hard tech and soft tech, I feel like, and so there's inherent
Yeah.
advantages in
Yeah.
both. And when in times of
Hmm.
uncertainty and flight, I feel like a lot of money goes to more safe hard tech stuff, and Tesla is a destination for that too. And so I feel like
Hmm.
there's some safety now in Tesla being like one of these mega caps that's just kind of like it's just it's gonna have capital flock to it one way or another, and it might drop with the whole
Hmm.
market, but it'll rebound quickly, or it might not drop as much as the rest of the market. Before S&P inclusion, before it was seen as like as a $1 trillion market cap company, the market would crash 10% and Tesla would go down 40%. I don't think that's possible anymore with Tesla. It could happen. I
Yeah.
just don't think it's likely. I think it's very unlikely. So I think it's a much safer play
Yep.
today. And I think the path to 2 trillion is there, 2 trillion market cap, and the path to the biggest company in the world is definitely there I always say by the end of the decade, but I think it'll be much sooner in terms of stock market valuation. But I think in terms of revenue and profits, it'll be by the end of the decade for sure. But the market will
Yeah.
realize it as a stock valuation much sooner. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, kind of the same. So, I come at this, I've got like a very valuation heavy kind of background, which was initially a burden to me investing in Tesla. I love the company, love the product, but couldn't get my head
Mm.
wrapped around the valuation. It was really only once I saw kind of autonomy as like a what I thought of as like a real option on the company, where if they solved that, then their margin potential would be like drastically higher than any other company ever. So, that was what kind of convinced me to invest in the first place. But now what's happened in kind of the intervening couple of years is they've really surprised on just how efficient they can be in the manufacturing business. Like literally nobody thought they could be this profitable just from, their factories, actually physically making the goods. So that they've got this incredible advantage, and then they still haven't really taken advantage of this initial opportunity that I saw on like Autonomy. So as I'm looking at it and kind of looking at valuation metrics and like forward PE ratios and, EV to EBITDA multiples and that sort of thing, I think their current valuation is more or less backstopped just with their kind of core operations. Assuming a reasonable amount of kind of growth rate going forward, as EVs continue to take market share from ICE vehicles. But then you've still got, like the option of that. Then you've got like optionality around the energy side of the business, the Tesla bot, and a lot more like real world AI applications than we can probably even imagine. So in my mind, it's like, I think there's a good chance we get to, I don't know, $2,000 per share, the $2 trillion market cap, like Emmet was saying, sometime reasonably in the next several years. Maybe it happens faster. Maybe it's a little bit more stretched out. But the thing that gets me excited and makes me just convinced to kind of continuously hold is it's still the very early days for a lot of these other incredibly disruptive things that they're kind of working on in their own, skunk works to call it. So
yeah,
that's what gets me excited.
What about you, Hamilton? What gets you excited about Tesla?
So I love this conversation. This is where I feel like I'm ready to geek out as a fanboy talking to you two guys about Tesla. I feel like we could do another hour on this alone. And of course, nothing that we say is investment advice. But,
right.
I remember, Emmet, when you and I were comparing notes and over the summer, we were like, okay, it's at $600. And I think we both were of the mindset that this is definitely going to hit 900 by the end of the year. So I think it's, I don't want to be too confirmation biasy, but it was really amazing to see it finally catch up. And it really did catch up, like we said, kind of in this curve shaped way where it just all of a sudden leveled up and then it stuck at the new level. I do see it going from $1,100 to about $1,400 a share sometime by, let's say, June of 2022. I think that there are tremendous tailwinds on the factory stuff. And I know this is where I'm even more of a geek. I literally will sit down and watch the Tesla Giga Austin drone videos of the factory being built daily.
There's a lot of those,
multiple times a day. There are a lot of them. I also watch the Shanghai build out and I watch the Berlin build out. And there are literally videos on that every single day. And it's pretty extraordinary. You see that one thing that Tesla's been able to do is they've been able to make their contractors move as fast as their employees. And so you see that on the build out, it's really extraordinary how quickly they go. So this policy enablement, I think, is really big. You see Elon Musk, revealing in his emails to people that, hey, tell you to do something, that means do it or give me a reason. Otherwise, you're fired,
Yeah.
So I think that culture, you're seeing the impact of that culture really bleed through the company. And going back to our talk about, founders and what makes a startup successful, I do think culture is probably an under-indexed thing. One of my old college acquaintances was Tony Hsieh of Zappos, who's sadly passed away, but he used to live across the hall from me in our dorm at Harvard. And, he's the reason, in my opinion, why Zappos succeeded. And it's because of his culture of customer service. I think that was the legacy of what he did. And it trickled down all the way to even assembly line workers and, of course, customer service reps. So I think Elon gives people that move fast and break things type of ethos. And I think the technology is amazing. I do feel like the neat thing about them is that they keep surprising on the positive side on manufacturing. So, China's supposed to do 500,000 cars. Like, actually, it feels more like 700 to 800 grand. Like, we might be at over 900 grand right now. We're going to build a little bit more. We'll probably get to 1.1, 1.2 million cars on a factory that was supposed to do 500,000. So if you look at the build out times for cars, that shows you just how much tremendous demand there is. I think I'm very bullish on them. And I'll just say on the, going back to our discussion of technical diligence and really kicking the tires, I love that, Emmet, you've talked about driving a Model S Plaid. And I know, Matt, you've also talked about FSD 10.5 and doing the FSD beta. That's an example of you guys saying, look, I need to know. I need to know if these things are any good. I need to know if the yoke is in fact useful, and I know where you stand on the record on that, Emmet. And I know where you stand, Matt, on 10.5 and its shortcomings. But that's exactly what you need to do, is you need to try the thing for yourself. In Autonomy, there are other names it's easy to forget about. And Cruise is a YC company. Now it's GM Cruise, I think. And then Voyage also got acquired by Cruise. That was another YC company. These people do know what they're doing. And if you look at some of the Cruise videos online, of course, there could be some staging and all that, and just kind of like picking and choosing examples. But this problem is getting solved. I do feel like Tesla is kind of fighting with one arm behind its back, with cameras that are maybe too far back on the B pillar, and without you know, some additional sensors. I think an external microphone would be awesome, actually. I'm not sure I completely buy the sensor fusion argument, although when my kids speak too much in the car as I'm driving, I am having sensor
I get the
fusion
sensor
issues.
fusion then too. Sensor confusion.
So I don't know that it's the, you know, I have huge faith though in Andrej Karpathy, so we'll see what happens. But I do find it interesting. I went on too long. Sorry.
No, that's great. It's
a really good point. And, you know, like as big as, like, you know, fanboys as we are, I think it's also really important to not let that kind of bias your investment decisions and kind of your viewpoint on how the technology is progressing. I mean, so if our investment philosophy was kind of predicated on them solving autonomy, say next year, I would have, you know, really big concerns about that. You know, thankfully it's not. You know, we think there's like on that point in particular, I think it's a very reasonable point of view that maybe autonomy can't be solved with the current set of hardware, but they'll just introduce hardware 4, iterate on that for a while, and then that solves it. And by the time they solve it anyways, just with the way the kind of deliveries scale over time, you know, the number of vehicles on hardware 3 will be relatively insignificant to, you know, whatever your valuation of that proposed robotaxi fleet would be at that point anyway. So, you know, I think it's important to kind of track progress and be realistic about when you can expect things.
I agree.
And make sure it's all kind of tied together.
I think, you know, a lot of times people like to see how fast following the rest of the auto industry is, and you see a lot of it. You know, the certain things are like, we're not going to do that, but certain things like, okay, fine. So we're going to do fleet-wide updates over the air. Now most people know that that's the game they have to be in. We all have to focus on EV. Okay, fine, we'll do that too. Okay, non-dealer sales. Okay, fine, we'll do that too. But there's certain things like mega casting. They're like, I don't know about that. I think one of the things that is rarely talked about that Tesla has done that has broken the industry mold is hardware retrofits for free. You know, some of them are paid, but I've been the beneficiary of this even in my Model S, where they've, you know, brought things back. And so even on the camera stuff, Elon Musk has gone on the record, I think on Twitter, and said that, you know, we'll do those retrofits, and they are beginning to schedule hardware retrofits with new cameras for older Model S's. So I do think that you know, the dedication is there, but sometimes, you know, one of the things that is tricky about what Elon does, I think, is he really tries to thread the needle. Like, you know, one thing that I've learned about in startups is that there are no bonus points for difficulty. So if you make it too hard for yourself, you know, the customer doesn't really care. So it may be more of a technical feat to make this work without LiDAR, but if that means that the customer is more concerned driving around, then, you know, you could potentially lose on that. Now, for the record, I do feel like, you know, Tesla is going to solve it. I do think they'll probably be the first to solve it at scale. The thing that I'd love to see from them is, you know, more of neural net memory, for lack of a better word, where I like the idea of, if I've driven this thing 1,000 times in a row, and you can see exactly what path my car is taking. And Emmet has driven the same road, and 75,000 other people have driven the same road. Just assume that that's the right way and add that to the calculus, as opposed to making it a completely fresh slate every time. Because I feel like drivers really depend a lot on contextual knowledge of having driven the same roads over and over again, as opposed to how to drive, but how to drive that road. And I think if we don't do HD mapping, which I'm fine with, but I still would love that kind of stickiness and some of the short-term, medium-term knowledge that's been stored on what people have driven in certain road scenarios before.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. I mean, that was one of my experiences with FSD beta is just like I'm having to do the exact same intervention at all the exact same places every time. And I do think they'll work on that, and I don't think it's
Oh yeah.
it's a fatal flaw, but it's to your point. I mean, it's kind of one of the ways that they're kind of working with one arm tied behind their back. That if you kind of understand the reasons why they're doing it that way, I think it makes sense, and I think it's going to be the most scalable way to address solve this problem. And if they do solve it with just this sensor suite, I mean, the margin implications are just like mind-boggling. So it's still encouraging that I'm still enthusiastic that they can solve it, but it's hard. I mean, it's a harder problem to solve than I think I realized a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I have faith in
one of
Elon.
them. Yeah, Emmet, go ahead.
I think Elon. People have doubted him in the past, and it seems to. He seems confident, very confident in the sensor suite. I think he might retrofit some new cameras, perhaps with a wider fish angle, fish-eyed lens or something like that. Possibly, that's possible. But he seems very confident in the vision-only stack. And you and we use just our eyes to see everything, right? We don't need LiDAR to drive. But at the same time, you have Cruise, Waymo, and some others out there that seem to be very talented and have a very different philosophical approach in terms of combining lots of sensors. I think Comma.ai and Tesla are the only ones doing really vision only stuff. And
even Comma though, like they basically abandoned city street driving. Like the last George Hotz interview I saw, he's like, we're not trying to do turns. And so I had kind of thought of them as like a second place. And now I'm like, all right, like I think he's just kind of happy to kind of sit there and collect, some money for this like kind of decent highway system that they've got. I don't think they're really devoting the resources necessary to solve the harder problems.
I think they want to be Tesla autopilot for everyone that's not a Tesla,
Yeah, but I don't think they'll solve autonomy.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, I mean, it's almost like saying there's one kid who's going to do a spelling bee on these 100 basic words. And another person, which would be the Elon Musk way, which is give me any word in the world. Now, this second speller might be 100 times better than the first speller, but the first one looks like a genius because they have a very limited problem set. So I think it's important to differentiate the two. And in the end, some people give you a lot of credit for defining the boundaries of the task that you're going to do. So it's like, how well are you living up to the task that you say that you're going to do is a separate analysis for how difficult ultimately is the task that you're going to try to get done. I rely on vision only when I play Forza Motorsports on my Forza Horizon or whatever it's called on my I'm driving all over the place, man. I'm missing the road left and right. But I do think that there is something indescribable about human intuition when we do drive. Actually, my daughter now is learning to drive. And so I have a lot of experience gripping the wheel and gripping the sides of the car and having phantom braking. One of the things I'll be like, do you see how that person tipped the car a little bit this way? Okay. Yeah. And can you see, even things like, do you see what model car they're driving? That will tip you off to how fast that car is. Don't try to beat a Model 3 in traffic. So I think that there's so many variables that we may take for granted as humans with our organic fleshy brains that are still not the province of digital neural nets. So that's why I think there may need to be a little bit of a bridge in between. But I think one of the ways that Elon keeps the pace on people, he goes, I'm not going to give you something that's I'm going to keep you 2 steps removed from every problem. So then it just forces you to quicken the pace. It's like, I can't just jog to keep up. I got to run. And sometimes that means I'm going to scrape my knee, but it's going to force me to run.
Yeah. And I would almost argue that everything we gather intuition from with our vision, like the examples you described, could theoretically be gathered through neural networks in the long tail of things, but that could take a long time to get there.
Yes.
Let's see.
Yeah. And that's, go ahead, Hamilton.
No, I was just going to say one of the human qualities, I think, is judging what we maybe call intentionality. And so that's that whole thing. I think Dave Lee has talked about this, where it's like the perception is not the issue. The issue is the judgment, the decision making, the pathing, the what
Yeah.
to do part. And those are the quote unquote human-like qualities. But I think even intentionality is something that can be observed. And you're right, we can observe it with our eyes, but there may be yet another layer of interpretation that
Sure.
isn't the part that's been built yet. You know, it's
Yeah.
not straight from eye to motion.
Yeah, different context, layers of context beyond the, the initial visual observation, so lots of stuff. Yeah. So,
It's
I
a
mean,
hard problem.
yeah. So we're all bullish on Tesla. We're all a little skeptical,
Yeah.
or I'm not as skeptical as you guys, or even though Matt full self-drive a beta tester, I'm more bullish than he is, ignorant, as ignorant as I am on full self-driving without testing it myself. But
You have autopilot. You have full self-driving.
I've autopilot, and I've
Regular.
seen the
Yeah.
demos of the
Yeah.
other people, but Matt is actually experienced it, and he's skeptical more than I am, so I should probably trust his gut. But somehow I'm still thinking, Anyway, what about your other stocks that you like? You like Moderna a lot, right?
Yeah.
You've talked to me about Moderna, and I actually, my IRA account, I bought a substantial amount of leaps when it dipped down to like 200 or low 200s. Lucky me,
Good
right?
for you.
And it's come up
Right.
quite a bit. I sold some yesterday, recently after it bounced up, but I still have
Smart.
most of my lease. But I think long term, it seems like one of those generational companies, that's going to be here for the, if I zoom, like, you and some other people are very bullet that I really respect, or study it very closely and think Moderna's here to stay. It's going to be like a staple, stock or a company for years to come. And I can see that too, like Nvidia or Moderna. Like there's certain stocks that I just get a feeling for that, as much as they've come up, maybe they went too high too fast, but in 5 or 8 years, they're still going to be staple stocks of some sort. And if they dip a lot, it's a good opportunity to potentially buy some. I don't know a whole lot about Moderna other than that they're like the leaders of mRNA vaccines and a pure play on that. Pfizer has that too, but it's not a pure play on that. So tell us a little about your Moderna, thesis.
Yeah. I'll start with the fact that, the executive leadership at Moderna has proven itself during the pandemic. When I first got introduced to the stock, it was, of course, at the beginning of for me, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And if you just look at where biotech is going these days and how quickly it's being developed, it's pretty extraordinary. I do think we may be entering into a golden 100 years of biotech where we'll be able to solve darn near any problem that we need to. I hear a little feedback, so if that's going on, I apologize.
I don't hear it.
Okay, good. So with Moderna, I do think that they have a platform that can be built upon in order to develop other drugs. So they have one called a vaccine for the CMV virus, cytomegalovirus, which causes birth defects that there currently is no cure for. So this is something that is already pretty deep into development, and hopefully in 2022, we'll get clinical results in phase 2 and phase 3. I think also they're working on a combo flu COVID vaccine that should be helpful. But Moderna is currently, I think, $140 billion valuation. Pfizer, which develops many drugs and is truly conglomerate, is quote unquote only $300 billion. And with its partnership with BioNTech is also a COVID provider. So from, going to Matt's point, I think from a valuation standpoint, you might consider it expensive. It definitely has been. Tesla and Moderna were my two biggest performers for sure last year and this year. Last year, I was up 340% on my total portfolio gain. This year's 76%, I think, as of today. So, that hasn't captured the gains of either of those because I, of course, diversified to a large extent. But I do feel like Moderna, I like, I just like you listen to all of Elon Musk's interviews. I listen to all of Stefan Benzel's, the ones that I can, to really get a sense of what's going on over there. They have had some leadership change. They lost their CFO last year. He was actually in my class at Harvard. He was selling shares upon his departure, if I'm not mistaken, at around $70 a share. So that kind of got me a little spooked. They lost their chief medical officer, or he left. Maybe he's done plenty and he's good and done, but they have a new person in that spot now. So these are just things that I look at. But overall, I feel like their execution has been amazing in terms of rolling out as much as they could. They're always a step behind Pfizer. I think they've had a few missteps with respect to relating to the FDA. And so this has hurt them so that they are still on EUA emergency use license as opposed EULA as opposed to being a full-on approved drug. I think for 12 to 18, and pediatrics, they're always going to be just a little slower. But I've gotten my Moderna shot and my booster. And I'm very happy. So I kicked the tires on the product. And I will even say that at the early part of the pandemic, and when they were doing clinical trials, I literally would follow on check out on social media, test subjects who had gotten the shots to see how they were responding to it. And it was very favorable. So I think that's part of doing your research.
Yeah.
So how do you, your background doesn't scream like bioscience,
Yeah.
So how do you kind of did you kind of dive into a lot of the technology there, or what was your kind of approach to understanding, the product at a more detailed level? How deep did you dive on it?
I dove deep. So I was literally reading the New England Journal of Medicine and certainly Stat News. There were a couple hit pieces that came out earlier in the year. So I kind of combed through to see if there was any true issue here. I'll read analyst reports to the extent that I can. Even when I read the New England Journal of Medicine, I'm literally looking at the footnotes. I'm looking at the tables. I'm looking at the sample sizes, diving into the social media, like I said, of individual subjects. Just to see how people are responding to the medicine. So I really like to get in deep. In terms of my own background, I was a psych major. I was a behavioral psych major. So I worked in the Skinner lab in William James Hall at Harvard. And so I'm used to like getting deep in on the science. I had friends who went to Harvard Medical School. There was even a time when I was grading papers for Harvard Medical School students in class. So I feel very comfortable with the scientific side of things. So to me, I can geek out on that as well. But I'm very bullish on where we are in terms of solving problems. So whether it's CRISPR technology or mRNA or other new rising technologies out there to solve the problems, I think we are beginning to get to the point where it could be argued that we're reducing some of biology down to code and are able to solve some of the problems that ail us.
What do you think Moderna?
It looks like on my end,
Moderna,
go ahead, Emmett.
Yeah, Moderna, if it's, how big do you think the market cap for Moderna could get, as the decade goes on? Do you think it could reach 500 billion market cap or $1 trillion by the end of the decade? Like if mRNA really takes off and becomes like super customizable or something, what are your thoughts medium to long term on Moderna?
I'll just randomly throw out there $300 to $600 billion as a potential market cap on the upside for Moderna. I think that the stock has been a retail favorite. So I think, it has crossed, I think, $460 a share. Right now it's $345 a share or so. So, I wouldn't mistake the 460 for necessarily its true value given that retail tailwind. Sure. But I do think that, if they get the CMV virus vaccine approved, which I would assume they do, if they can get a flu shot that is in the 90% efficacy range versus the current flu shot of 50% that's commonly available, I think that will be also a nice game changer. And then it really comes down to just how complex are the things that they can solve. So if they can start using mRNA to solve male pattern baldness, or if they can use it to solve other things that are of interest to a wide swath of the population, I think that's when we'll really see things take off.
Yeah.
But I'll just say through the end of the decade, maybe 300, 600, there's still a lot of execution and of course, regulatory risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes time for this stuff to get approved by the FDA, at least, right? I mean, these things have to go through all kinds of trials. Do you think there's a faster, like just from a bird's eye view, do you think there's a point where Moderna can create, they mapped out the vaccine, I remember for COVID, like within like weeks or something, but it took like almost a year for it to be approved by the time it was going through trials and when approved. Do you think that there's a path forward at some point for Moderna to like get so good at mapping vaccines for specialty things that maybe they start offering them in other countries that don't require FDA approval. People fly
Yeah.
to other countries to get the specialized male baldness, vaccine, even though it's not FDA approved, but
Yeah.
it's built. It might take, just to get it done early. Do you think that's something that could happen in the future? Or?
I do think so. So some like rogue purchasing or deployment into less regulated states, I think it's certainly possible. You already see that with some people who
Mhm.
battle cancer and go
Yeah,
and have
travel the
flown to
world.
China, for example, to get,
Yeah,
yeah, personalized DNA cures. They can work, and some people have flown to China and gotten a $600,000 cure for $400,000 or $200,000, and it's
yeah.
basically the same as the CRISPR technology that's being done out here, but they're done a little bit more freewheeling. So I do
Hmm.
think that there is certainly that possibility. I think also government, like any entity, is also going to have to evolve and adapt. And I think during
Hmm.
the Obama administration, there were good attempts to speed up the pace of technological influence within government. And I'm hoping that with the current administration, the next administration, that there will be more and more efforts to do so. I think the coronavirus pandemic has really highlighted the need to move quick,
Yeah.
and to have a little bit more of a startup mentality. When you talk about public health, obviously, every single T needs to be crossed, every I needs to be dotted. And so that's where, caution is recommended. But I do think that, we shouldn't assume that things will look the same in 5 years as they do today. I think what was today a $300 billion market cap will look like a $150 billion market cap by the end of the decade. So for on that reason
Yeah.
alone, I do see it's very possible for Moderna to double in market cap.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of echoing one of the themes that Emmett and I have talked about a lot of times, just with the broader kind of macro market. It seems, I think, to us that there's such a kind of like an age of disruption coming in the next decade with, AI and with a lot of the bioscience advances and the disruptive technologies like Tesla's pursuing, which are going to kind of lower costs and kind of drive GDP activity overall, presumably a lot higher and at higher margins and kind of raising standard of living, which would, potentially drastically increase stock market values more broadly, to a degree that has not really happened historically for any prolonged period of time. Is that kind of your view on the bigger kind of macro themes going forward in the next decade, or what's your thought on picking up on that comment you had about today's market cap seeming small a couple of years from now?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that you know the Civil War was in the 1865 or so, right? So that's
Hmm.
less than 200 years ago. Um, it where were we as a society 100 years ago? Still asphalt roads being paved. So the amount of change that we've seen since, let's say, the late 70s, with the onset of personal computing to where we are today is incredible. It Mapping the human genome was supposed to be like a 10-year project or some multi-year long thing, and now it's I think a relatively trivial thing for a modern supercomputer to do. So 25 years ago was the beginning of Amazon.com and what we're seeing today. So the pace of technological evolution is accelerating, I think, to a degree that it's very hard for us to accept. The same way that, it's only whatever 40 some folds of a piece of paper to match the distance from Earth to the moon. It's just very difficult for our human brains to grasp the
Hmm.
concept of compounding. And I think what we're seeing now is the compounding of technology. So, the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, which is Mark Zuckerberg's foundation, I think they even set out an audacious goal of eradicating all disease within the next 100 years. Now, some of his audacious goals, like metaverse, might be a little bit harder to relate to. I'm not sure I believe in that one, but I think this one I do think is semi possible. And there are folks out there who are talking about life extension and maybe even crazy things like immortality. So I think biotech is going to be huge for the next 100 years. I also think that we're sometimes losing sight on the really massive societal things that can be improved with technology. So when people were talking about autonomous cars, one thing they were saying is this will enable us to reimagine how cities should be built. So much of a real estate of a city is parking lots. And if your Tesla or other car can go drive itself somewhere else and come and pick you up at the right time, that's going to change where people live, how they live, where they work. So I think it's hard for us to predict exactly how different things will feel in 5, 15, 20 years, but I'm hoping certainly for a lot more for the better.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, this is a great chat, Hamilton. I think we're nearing the end of our time. Really enjoyed talking with you. And where's the best way for people to find you if they want to chat with you or ask you questions or follow you?
Certainly, I would drive people to our coursework at LMU Loyola Law School. So the website is llx.lls.edu. And I teach a course there on negotiations, which is some material, a course that I used to teach through the negotiation workshop at Harvard Law School's program on negotiation. So I know a lot of students have learned a lot through that. I also will occasionally teach special one-off courses through the Loyola Law School program, executive education program. So I encourage people to find me there. And otherwise, I am on social media. So, and hopefully I'll be back on this channel so they can find me here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
We'll put a
we'll
lot
make
of that
sure
information in the description of the
Sure.
videos. Yep.
Awesome.